All right, welcome everyone this evening. It's nice to see everyone out there, and welcome to the Ada County Fiscal Year 2020 Tentative Budget Presentation. It is Monday, the 22nd, and it's 6 o'clock, and we have at the dais, I'm very pleased to see most of our elected officials up here sitting with us, which is wonderful. Coroner Dottie Owens is not with us this evening, but I'm going to go ahead and start down to the far right with the sheriff, and if you wouldn't mind stating your name and what position you hold, and we'll move all the way down to this end.
Good evening, thank you. Steve Bartlett, I'm your Ada County Sheriff.
Good evening, Jan Bennett. I'm your Ada County Prosecutor.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Mon, your Ada County Treasurer.
Good evening. I'm Rick Visser, District 2 Ada County Commissioner.
Good evening. I'm Kendra Kenyon, District 3 Ada County Commissioner and Chair.
Diana Laciando, Ada County Commissioner, District 1.
Bob McQuaid, Ada County Assessor. Rick, you're always trying to upstage me.
All right. Please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Make sure your ringers are off. Thank you very much. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing, and I'm going to invite our clerk, Phil McGrain, also an elected official, if you wouldn't mind coming up and stating your name and title for the record. And Phil is going to be running us through the presentation on the budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow elected officials. I really appreciate you being here and your support this evening. As was noted, the purpose of this evening is to present Ada County's balanced budget for the FY20 fiscal year. I have the privilege of not only serving as the elected clerk, but also as the ex officio auditor and budget officer for Ada County. And before I begin with some of the details in the budget and going over everything, I want to acknowledge a few folks, because certainly this work is not a byproduct of my efforts, but the collective efforts, especially of some specific people. First, I want to thank you, commissioners. I know that this is a daunting task. I have the unenviable position of pushing you to help you make decisions along the way and guiding you through this process. And distributing this kind of money is not an easy task for anyone. I want to thank the Department of Administration, specifically HR and Procurement, who we work very closely with in terms of providing guidance and assistance to all the departments and county offices as we work through it. And then specifically within the clerk's office, our controller, Kathleen Graves. This is the only way all the numbers balance to the T is because of Kathleen and then her business partner, Tim Sturgis, who make sure to comb through every submission to make sure that everything ticks and ties as we go throughout. And you'll see that as we cover this evening. Additionally, I want to thank Anthony Locksmith, our data analyst. You'll see his work in full shine tonight. Anthony has come up with something I think really spectacular in terms of increasing transparency and access to budget information and really sharing what we do in the county with the public. Hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that, as well as Lori Beck, who assists with personnel matters throughout the budget, and Bob Hutchinson, who is a software developer who has worked closely with Anthony and others to really make it possible for all our financial systems to work, who also works closely with Kathleen to make sure we are always in balance and we know where every dollar is spent. The purpose this evening really is to share with the public the budget that we have developed over the course of the last 6 months. The county has worked tirelessly, specifically the county elected officials, as well as all the department heads, making sure that we submit a budget that we can have confidence not only is balanced, but also serves the needs of our community. I know numerous people worked very hard to make this possible, and I see many of them in the room tonight. If there's a theme for this year's budget, it's a theme that has become all too familiar throughout the Valley, and that is growth and the impact it has on governance. Growth in the Valley has exploded. Just this past year, Meridian was recognized as one of the top 5 fastest growing cities in the United States by the Census Bureau, growing at a rate of 6.1% just in this past year. With that additional growth comes extra demands. You'll see throughout our budget the demands specifically on our coroner's office, which is an aging facility and lacking the capacity that the coroner's office needs to be able to conduct its business. Similarly, at the Ada County Jail, we've reached a level of capacity where it's not too uncommon for the sheriff to have to rely on cots or other means just to house the inmates in his facility. And then the addition of 3 new judges. This past spring, the legislature added 3 new judges to Ada County, and that has a huge reverberating effect on all the judicial-related offices throughout here, whether that's prosecutor, public defender, the trial court administrator's office, the clerks, all of it related to the additional growth. With that additional growth comes demand, and we're doing everything we can in this budget to meet that demand. Now I want to start this process by sharing with you, rather than follow a traditional PowerPoint or other presentation as you might find elsewhere, we've taken a new step in terms of transparency. It's one of the keynotes that I've really pushed in our office, and I think it was Anthony Locksmith's brilliant idea to be able to provide greater access to the public. Now on the Ada County website, the public has access to the tools that I'll be sharing tonight. So I'm going to be your guide as we explore the FY20 budget as it was developed. As I go through this process, I'll actually be demonstrating how to use the Budget Explorer tool. And throughout that, I'll be highlighting some of the key points of this year's budget and what are the highlights and significant things that we've taken on. So to begin, let's meet the Ada County budget team as it refreshes. Ada County is comprised, as you see, of 9 elected officials, beginning with the commissioners and then each of the other elected offices that were just introduced earlier. Over on the left-hand side is the budget team, those folks who work closely on the budget. And yeah, for those of you who are sitting in the audience, you're best off seeing either near one of the screens. So you're either best in the front rows or the back rows if you want to see all the detail. But in case you don't want to move, I can assure you, you can go back to your computer at home and study this all evening long. In terms of the team, we have the clerk's office. Statutorily, the clerk's office is tasked with overseeing the budget process and working through with all the department heads and elected officials to ensure that we submit a balanced budget and working through the challenges of prioritizing. A budget really is a reflection of the priorities of the county, and you'll see that as we go throughout the night. Also, we have our business partners in the Department of Administration, Cassie Porter, who oversees our HR team, Bob Perkins, who oversees procurement, Judy Morris, who helps us navigate all of the hearings, including this evening, and Kelly Ponanen, our risk manager. All those people serve a crucial role in terms of supporting the offices and departments as they develop their budgets. And then also, we wouldn't be able to do this without the support of Ada County's IT, specifically Antonio Serio, Bob Hutchinson, and Joshua Smith, who work very closely with our financial system and work with us to facilitate not only the presentation this evening, but some of the access to this information online that we've been able to share with the public throughout the process. In terms of the submissions of the budget, you can easily see over here each of the elected offices. One of the great things with this tool is for anyone in the public who is exploring our budget and wants to find more, we have provided additional information in terms of each of the offices. So for each department, we have 18 departments with department heads below, and provided their contact information if anyone wants to follow up. Similarly, with our elected offices, we have contact information for them as well. Now, beginning the journey in terms of the budget process. Our budget process began in January of this year. Specifically, we had our first meeting initiating the budget process 3 weeks after 2 of our newly elected county commissioners took office. So there's nothing like jumping into the deep end to start your journey. We were asking them tough questions in terms of setting some of the general guidance for the county in terms of where we want to head and what the parameters were for departments and offices as they developed their budgets. With that guidance, we spent the spring throughout the county where elected officials and department heads worked through planning what the next 18 months might look like so that we could develop budget proposals that would reflect their priorities and their ultimate requests. Those are just the requests that each of the departments have during the process. Then, in the beginning of May, as is set by statute, each department submitted their budget to the clerk's office, in which we compile all that information and began the process of being able to deliberate and prioritize what each of the needs are. For those who are using this tool, along the way, there are tool tips that if you hover over will explain what each phase of the process was. So someone who's using this at home can easily see what work has been done in terms of the budget. One of the great things that we were able to add last year and continue to do this year is streaming live our budget presentations and deliberations via YouTube. All our budget presentations are here. Each of the county offices and departments presented to the county commissioners. By clicking on here, it'll take anyone who's using the tool to the link where it's highlighted which departments are where. All of it through IT has been cataloged so that someone can go through and find any respective section and see the budget presentation for each of the respective departments. Let's see here. So each of these links reflect the budget presentations of the given day, and as you can see from the tooltip, it reflects which departments presented when. So anybody looking for a specific issue or a specific thing can actually go see the presentation that was recorded at that time. After which we had budget deliberations. The budget deliberations are when the county commissioners weigh all of the requests that were presented to them earlier that month. Similarly, by clicking on this link, it will take you to all the budget deliberations and the recordings from the YouTube streams at that point. So now that we've kind of gone through the process, here we are sharing the public information to move forward, and now I'll dive into the actual details of our budget. As you can see here, the total Ada County budget is $288 million, $146,000 million. Man, there's a mouthful. That's a lot of money.
It's $1 billion.
It's a lot. $288 million for short. You can see here in this graph just a reflection of what that budget is comprised of. So 42% of the Ada County budget goes to public safety needs. 24% goes to general government, with 17% to judicial services, 7.2% to sanitation, 4.7% to health and welfare, and 3.5% to recreation-related services. As you can see, we can highlight over each of these and show a breakdown of where that money is going and how much is going to each of the respective offices and departments in this process. The highlights of this year's budget are seen over here in terms of the major changes. In terms of this budget submission, personnel budget is increased by $10 million. That is comprised of 63 new positions, as well as a 1% cost of living adjustment and 2% merit pool for the 1,965 county employees within the county. In terms of major projects, this budget is actually down $10 million, although that really reflects is this past year in FY19, we had a $15 million parking garage that we funded. With the removal of that parking garage is why it shows the significant decrease. We still have $19 million in capital projects that are being funded in this budget. You can see some of the major ones. Our master's facility plan implementation, which I'll speak to a little bit in more detail later, as well as funding a new drug court facility. That's a priority from last year that's carried over, as well as our payroll and time and attendance replacement, which is also a carryover from the prior budget. In terms of funding sources, this was significant for this year. Property taxes are up $14 million for FY20. That is comprised of Ada County taking $3.9 million for its allocation of a 3% increase in terms of the annual increase for property taxes, $5.7 million in terms of the new construction roll, which is a reflection of the growth and the new construction that we've seen throughout the valley. And then also on July 9th, we held a special hearing in which the commissioners had presentations and took public feedback before deciding to take $4.5 million in terms of foregone taxes. These are those taxes that were not taken in previous years by previous boards that are now being used to fund some of the major projects that I spoke to earlier. All right, I'm gonna now dive in deeper so we can get kind of a scenic view of what our expenses are and what are the priorities for the county this year. As you'll see as I go throughout this, this tool provides enormous access in terms of transparency to anybody who's wanting to look into this budget. This next step will really reflect that in terms of the process. Here I'll navigate some of this information and some of the most useful parts, but most specifically, one of the things I want to highlight is right here down in the lower right-hand side. One of the things we've been able to do through the tool is estimate the tax impact to our local residents. We currently have this built on a $340,000 home. That is actually currently the median home value in Ada County. So just serving as a guide. But anybody who's using it is free to enter their own information and make any adjustments. And here, just to demonstrate, I'll add $1 to that house. And you'll see their taxes went up a penny. And you can see the changes that occur. But this is a really interesting and fun number to watch in terms of understanding for each of the taxpayers where their money is going and what it's being used towards. And I'll demonstrate that here. In terms of an overview, as up at the top, we can see our total expenses are $288 million, as I previously mentioned. Total revenue is $267 million, with the use of $21 million in savings. That savings is one-time money being used for major projects and one-time expenses. So it's those things that we've been able to identify are one-time uses for this year. This also reflects the history in terms of what the Ada County budget was over previous years. You can see this budget is larger than last year's, which is a reflection of that growth. And as we go through this, in terms of taxes, throughout this, using these tooltips, you can click on any of these links to filter the information. So simply by clicking on 2019, it will adjust our calculator below, both to reflect what the average taxes would have been for that same home, and it also adjusts the value to what the valuation of that home would have been in previous years. So we can kind of see throughout the years how property taxes have adjusted for the average home throughout the years. You'll notice as I go down, property taxes are decreasing, and as I go up, one of the things that reflects that is the growth and the increase in taxes that have been needed to support that growth. But also, I want to highlight one of the significant changes is something Assessor Bob McQuaid recently focused on, is the shift in terms of taxes from commercial properties to residential properties. The residential real estate, the valuation of that is increasing at a higher rate than the commercial market is. And so as that higher rate increases on residential properties, it actually shifts some of that tax burden to homeowners over to commercial owners. All right. Now getting into some of the real highlights. So one thing I mentioned that the years will filter the information. I'll also highlight we can focus on, for example, public safety and see what portion of the budget that is focused on public safety, how much money for each taxpayer is going just to supporting public safety. You can see how it filters through the information. Obviously, with public safety, our Ada County Sheriff making up the bulk of that effort. Additionally, as I highlight, you can see here, when we highlight over any of these specific items, you can see the makeup of the budget. The teal color represents personnel expenses, while the purple color represents operating expenses. You can see the sheriff is a very heavy personnel-related service, and that really changes depending on who we look at. So just to give a good example, our operations department is exactly the opposite. Operations maintains all our facilities. It's very heavy in terms of its capital costs and the maintenance costs that it has in comparison to, say, part of the clerk's office, which is almost exclusively personnel. All right, I'm going to use this now to focus on a few key areas throughout our budget. The first and the largest and most significant is our general fund. This is the overarching where our major capital things are. As we click on any of these individual offices or departments, you'll notice it will filter the information, but it also offers highlights of what both the description of the department or office, what their function is, and highlights in terms of this year's budget. I focus here first because this is where the largest items are located. Specifically, we have $3 million focused on the property design of a new coroner's facility. As I mentioned at the beginning, the coroner's office has really taken a hit with all of the growth and the increased demand on their services, both in the need for new facilities, but also in interim phases that we'll talk about specifically for their office. Additionally, there's $3.2 million for the sheriff's office to acquire new land and to look at design costs of expanding the jail to a new pod. $2 million for payroll and time and attendance software for us to upgrade our antiquated software that we're currently using to manage payroll. And then $500,000 for the lease of a second location for driver's license. These are some of the major highlights and major expenses that comprise this year's budget. And these are the focus of the discussion on July 9th in terms of the county commissioners considering the taking of foregone taxes to help fund these projects. Next, I'll switch over to the coroner's office, as I mentioned. In addition to funding for design of a new facility, there's also $350,000 for an additional morgue cooler to help in the interim phase between now and a new facility to handle the additional load that they're receiving, as well as some special salary adjustments in their office. Similarly, as was mentioned in the sheriff's office, in addition to looking at expanding the jail and Pod D, there are also a number of new positions related to both the jail as well as other functions of the sheriff's office, and specifically that new driver's license location. There's numerous upgrades in terms of technology and the property and evidence handling in the sheriff's office as well. I'm just going to pause here for a moment where you can notice as I've clicked on each of these, it will filter what portion of the budgets have changed over the years, as well as what the makeup of their revenue streams. Sheriff's office is a great example where department revenue comes in to support their office from many of the contracts that they receive, providing policing services to some of our cities within Ada County. Next, I'm going to hit an office close to home, our office. The auditor, recorder, and elections portion of the clerk's office. You can see here, one of the most significant things that impacts this fiscal year is the presidential preference primary next March. We will once again be voting on president and who the nominees will be for the general election. You can actually see over here when you look at the history, every 4 years there's a giant spike in the clerk's office budget. That's a spike both in expenses to cover this additional election as well as a spike in revenue. This is an election covered completely by the state that is a pass-through by the county who administers the election, and you can see that here. Additionally, there's $445,000 for electronic poll books to modernize our systems on election day in terms of processing voters and sharing information, as well as during this past year, the clerk's office took over the Board of Community Guardians, which is a program previously under the Commissioner's Office, administering those people who need assistance in terms of having an advocate for them in their state of life. You'll notice here, in terms of revenue streams, this is heavily supported by fees through recordings and other fees that are collected by the clerk's office. Just to hit a few other areas, Department of Administration. There are a number of community programs located in the Department of Administration. One I specifically want to highlight is $50,000 for Peer Wellness Center. We had public testimony during the budget process, and during that public testimony, there was a lot of support for this cause, and so we just wanted to make sure to highlight that it was, in fact, included in this year's budget. In Development Services, a major effort by the county commissioners is to be leaders in our community in terms of looking at regional planning, how both the county and the cities work together in terms of developing how growth is going to be handled in this region. As I mentioned, growth is one of the main focuses of this year's budget, and this is really reflected here with the $400,000 for a regional plan to be designed and to hire a consultant, as well as just under $200,000 for new positions focused specifically on regional planning. It's definitely one of the high priorities for our commissioners. One thing I'll highlight in operations budget, there are As with every year, operations has a daunting task in terms of maintaining our facilities, many of which are aging, including this courthouse, which may not show it, but specifically there's a multi-year plan to upgrade the audio-visual equipment in this building. This building was built in 2002, and as my staff likes to highlight, the audio-visual equipment here was created when the PlayStation 2 was in common use. As I think a better reference for many of us in the room, it was when everyone coveted a Nokia cell phone, which I'm sure many of you are still carrying today. It's a lot of time has lapsed and technology has evolved, and this building needs to evolve to adapt to it as well. Another major focus I'm going to highlight here is judicial services. This was one of the most common themes that we heard throughout the budget process. I'm going to click through fairly quickly, but you can see what judicial services is comprised of. It's very heavily tax supported. But as I hit briefly the highlights for each of these offices, you'll notice the first highlight on each of them is new judges. The clerk's office, prosecutor's office, public defender's office, and trial court administration all have major increases in personnel related to the support of new judges. Well, the new judges are supported by the state. All the supporting staff and efforts that go to make sure the judiciary is running and doing what it needs to do come from the county level. And that proved to be one of our most significant expenses, with 17 new positions just dedicated to supporting the 3 new judges that will be arriving in Ada County on October 1st. A couple of other notes. The Ada County landfill's budget is actually down 5.6%. This is reflected because of the additional costs experienced in the closing of the Hidden Hollow landfill, the Hidden Hollow site. So that is actually down. Also, we have in our budget within indigent services is an initiative focused on family homelessness, a public-private partnership that is being explored by the County Commission, as well as additional support for the Housing First initiative that is currently underway, as a partnership with Boise City and many other community partners. And then finally, there's an increase I want to highlight in Parks and Recreation. There's a lot of advocacy for improving some of the damaged greenbelt, specifically sections related to some of the flooding damage that occurred following Snowmageddon a few years back, as well as the expansion of paving the parking lot out at Barber Park to handle all the traffic that comes in related to the float season out there. All right, because I know everyone is thoroughly engaged in this process, I'm going to highlight briefly, if this information isn't enough for someone wanting to explore the Ada County budget, we provide even more. I'm going to briefly show you how you can take a deeper dive into our expenses. What I just showed you was an overview. Here is the line item detail level. So anybody wanting to find any expense within Ada County can find it here in terms of highlighting our line items that are throughout. Just like before, this information is filterable. As you'll notice, when I highlight any of the specific items, it will show a line graph showing the 5-year trend in terms of where our expenses are for that year. The teal area, again, represents personnel-related expenses, whereas the purple area represents operational expenses. But as you can see, I can hover through it down, and as I get down, I'll find some of the finer things that I think come largely out of the fair budget when we get into booths and other things that you'll see throughout here. As I mentioned, all of this, just like before, this information is filterable, so anybody looking specifically at any given office can go in and find additional information. I think one of the best factors of this, though, here is on the right-hand side. This will immediately filter and show what are the top 5 increases in a given budget, as well as what are the top 5 decreases. And this can be filtered either by dollar amount, which is currently reflected, or percent change in terms of looking at where the budget is going. Now, this is truly for the true wonk who wants to look at our budget in excruciating detail, but we wanted to make sure, in terms of an effort of transparency, we provided as much detail as possible to the public. I'm going to shift gears just briefly. and focus on revenue. As you can see, this giant block in the center is a graph showing the makeup of our revenue. Ada County is 55.4% funded through property taxes. That is the major revenue stream for the county, which is reflected here. But also we collect revenue from all sorts of different sources in terms of fees that are paid, contracts that we have. So for example, contracts that the sheriff has with the cities, and other related money. Trash collection is a great example of money that comes into Ada County and is additional revenue. As well as this yellow band here is money that are shared revenues that we receive from the state. So it could be revenue sharing from the state, sales tax, liquor tax. As you can see, drinking is going well in our area and is a key source of revenue for us. Just as before, highlighted are the top 5 increases as well as the top 5 decreases in terms of these revenue lines as well. As before, if someone's interested, all this information can be filtered. So for example, looking at the sheriff's office, you can see the makeup, which is actually pretty reflective of the entire county in terms of revenue, versus say, go to your auditor recorder elections, which is heavily supported by other revenue streams. So anyone wanting to follow where the dollars are, this tool provides that. I just want to highlight at the very top in terms of our revenue, total revenue is $67 million. You can see that change is up $19 million total. That's combined with that $14 million in new taxes that are being taken, as well as other revenues, including revenue sharing and department revenues that are up. Total revenue for this year's budget is up 8.1%. And with that, on my final page, I want to show a reflection of the credits, all the people that worked to make this budget process possible and to help provide as much information as we can to the community, as well as additional resources. For those of you who are here, in the back of the room, we have printed budget books with extra detail if you wanting to study further. That same information is here in terms of our budget book, as well as some of the information that led to the decisions that were made, including the Ada County Master's Facility Plan, our capital improvement program, and extraordinary operating expenses program. All of these were resources that were relied on by the offices, departments, and commissioners as this year's budget was developed. Throughout this process, as you can see, I've navigated through. One of our real big focuses was the county doesn't always get a lot of focus in terms of its budget, but I recall back a couple of years ago where at this very presentation, we had a community member really wanting to see where something was funded in the budget. And based on our historical budget book, we could show summaries, but we couldn't actually show someone that the program that they wanted was funded. As I demonstrated earlier with a program like Peer Wellness, through this tool, we give greater access, whether that's for scrutiny or for just people who are interested in where their taxes are going. And we really want to be open to the public in terms of feedback moving forward. I think that's a theme that's shared by myself as well as all the elected officials behind me, of how important we recognize it is to manage this money and be good stewards of it through this process. And with that, Madam Chair, I think we can open it up for public comment. Those are all the remarks I had, and hopefully everyone can appreciate the new tool that we've developed.
Thank you so much, Clerk Phil McGrain. This was wonderful. You and your team did a fabulous job here, walking us through the journey of the tentative FY20 budget, as exciting as it is. Thank you very much for the charts and graphs and the transparency for our public. So at this time, we'll open it up. If we have any public comments, please feel free to come on up to the podium, and you can have up to 3 minutes if there's anyone that would like to comment before I turn it over to my fellow elected officials to make closing comments for this evening. Is there anyone here? Okay, seeing no one is, yes, come on up, please, sir. Hi, welcome. Please go ahead and state your name for the record.
My name is Rhon Law, and I reside in Meridian, Idaho. Appreciate the opportunity. It's not very often I get to talk to you distinguished folks face to face and this close, so I'm going to take advantage of it. I really don't have a lot to say other than a couple of questions that I'll put in a statement form, and that is, I've always thought that the economy of scale would say that it's less costly per person to serve 1 million people and provide services to them than it is, say, 500,000 people. But it appears to me that the budget in Ada County keeps going up and up, and our taxes keep going up and up. And so then I have to wonder, is growth really paying for itself? Because in the explanation, it's all about growth, and I can understand that. So it appears to me that maybe growth isn't paying for itself. And according to what I saw here, and I haven't studied it in more detail, it looks like each year my taxes and your taxes are increasing. And I know each year the traffic in Ada County is increasing. I know the pollution in Ada County is increasing. So then I have to ask myself, well, is growth really a good thing then? How are we benefiting? Is it worth the cost that we're having to put forth? So I just want to throw those out kind of as a statement, but as kind of a question, not criticizing your budget or anything like that, because I know it's a very tough process you go through, a very detailed one, and I know that you're all looking out for the best interests of us taxpayers. And with that, I would close. Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate your comments and participating tonight. And if you wouldn't mind, please leaving your contact information before you leave with the clerk, if that's possible, and one of us will get back with you. We do share your concerns, and we would love to communicate back with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Okay, seeing that there's no one else wanting to provide comments tonight, I'm going to turn it over to our elected officials for any comments they may have about their budget process or the process in general. And I'll start again to my far right with Sheriff Steve Bartlett. Hot seat over there starting out.
I didn't pick wisely for this seat right now tonight, but, well, first of all, like our clerk, I would like to recognize our staff at the Sheriff's Office. Our budget process is really about an 8 or 9 month long process to be able to deliver our commissioners with the best product possible with all of the information. And so I know our staff was heavily involved in that, and I appreciate everything that they were able to do for us in doing that. Lastly, I would just like to say thanks to our new commissioners. Thanks for being engaged and actively involved in talking with our community and figuring out what it is that we're going to need to take care of our community over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And it's something that I think we've needed, is that long-term planning and figuring out what we need to do. And I think this year shows that. And so thank you for participating.
Thank you for your comments. Prosecuting Attorney Jan Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to thank, first of all, my staff. They do an amazing job, and as with the sheriff, we start almost immediately upon the close of this budget. We'll start looking to the future for the next budget. They work very hard, both on the budget and also just generally in our office. I want to thank my entire staff. I also want to thank the commissioners for the support and for holding the hearings and giving us the opportunity to make presentations and participate in the deliberation process by asking us questions and being involved. I am appreciative how engaged you are and how supportive and helpful, and so I want to thank you. And then lastly, I want to thank all the elected officials. This is truly a team effort, and the department heads, everyone works very hard to bring this budget to the public, to answer questions, and to provide the public with the best product that we possibly can. So thank you, and I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Treasurer Beth Munn.
Great. Thank you. And to reiterate the comments of the sheriff and the prosecutor, this has been a really positive process. This is my first year going through it, and I want to start by thanking the clerk, the controller. Their office was always accessible. Any questions I had about the personnel, about budgeting, always an open door to answer my questions. Great collaboration with HR, all the departments and working together. Also want to thank the commissioners. I know they just jumped into the deep end right from the get-go upon taking office. For me, it was really rewarding to see everyone coming together, collaborative process, and thank you all for your support.
Thank you. Commissioner Visser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're welcome. First off, outstanding job with that video presentation, having such a good interactive program for us and also for the community. Thank you for each of our elected officials, our department heads, and those others who contributed. It was interesting, though, that after one of our recent hearings, 2 employees came up to me and said, "What was Commissioner Laciando talking about?" And it was related to what she said in the newspaper. She said she couldn't believe the lack of planning done by previous board members. And then it also stated in that article that Chair Kenyon said it was inexcusable. Commissioner Laciando added that she was also deeply, deeply disappointed with our previous elected officials, not only our previous board, but the ones before them. I need to respond to those comments. I didn't that night because I was unaware that they would be coming up. Commissioner Laciando gave no examples of lack of planning, none. She made the statement, but no examples were given. Therefore, I will provide 4 that disprove those comments. There was plenty of planning by the board as soon as it was determined that a new 911 dispatch center was needed. Correct, Sheriff? Yes. That project was budgeted, it was undertaken, it consisted of challenges, and that commission, that board met those challenges so it could be completed. The board also took immediate action when it was discovered that the Penitentiary Canal Greenbelt needed urgent repairs as its degraded condition presented serious safety risks for our public. There was also a year when the judges asked for a new courtroom, and the commissioners responded. We budgeted for that urgent need. At the judges' presentation, I even commented that they were in need of 2 or 3 courthouses, not just 1. Finally, the lack of parking for the courthouse has been an ongoing problem. There's not enough parking spaces for those called to jury duty, nor is there enough for those who come in and pay a fine or file a court document. There's not enough parking for those citizens who visit development services, the public defender's office, and operations. There's not even enough parking for our own employees. The previous board set aside money and built up an account to fund a private-public venture that would provide parking at an efficient cost for the needs that we had, and that current project is now underway. There's also what I would call the proper perspective, or taking something in context. The Master Facilities Plan was approved in the fall of 2018. What's our plan? Well, we haven't had much time, but we've gone to the facility plan meetings, we've gone to the Board of Transformation meetings. Literally, there was no time, but action was taken, and there are decision makers out there. The 2 decision makers that left deferred intentionally to the incoming board. That was the action that they took. Therefore, when a crisis arose before the prior boards, they did act. The boards addressed the challenges and provided the funding for them. Thank you.
Commissioner Laciando, hopefully you'll have some more positive comments over on your side.
Well, thank you. First, I just want to, again, thank all of our staff, and I definitely want to thank Clerk McGrain for holding our hands through this process. I'm looking at the Climbing Mountains theme, and the months of May and June certainly felt like we were gradually scaling a very large mountain to get to the finish line. So as a new commissioner, just some reflections, and I actually want to touch on Mr. Law's comments. I was very heartened to come in and see such wonderful staff, dedicated staff working for Ada County, people who truly care about our community and are looking at ways to improve it and make it better. I was also somewhat shocked to come in and note that while the prior boards had done work in concert with all of our fellow elected officials to create a list of prioritized projects, there was no corresponding financial plan for how to pay for them. As Commissioner Vissers noted, the prior boards had paid for projects over time, but there is a difference between funding and paying for a one-off project and capitalizing a long-term capital improvement project, which is a best practice in government and something that is done in other entities and something that I know this board is looking at doing going forward. So for me, the key elements of this budget that I think address the concerns and questions that Mr. Laws is getting at. Number one, with that list of prioritized projects when we walked in, it's about $300 million worth of backlogged capital projects. Based on the current growth scenarios for Ada County, that balloons out to about $600 million. We don't have that sitting around here, and it's about 3 times what our annual budget is. So for me, and I know for my fellow commissioners, a key priority was looking at how can we be a leader? How can Ada County be a leader in looking at how growth is occurring in our community and finding ways to be both fiscally responsible with how that growth occurs and preserve our quality of life. And that's reflected in this budget, both in the work that we're going to engage, hopefully in concert with ACHD and our fellow cities to create an Ada County coordinated growth plan, and also with the future implementation of impact fees, something that the prior boards had never chosen to undertake in, which is really one way that we can ask for new growth to start to pay for itself. So I am excited about this budget. I still am probably daily consuming Tums for the amount of heartburn it gave me over the last six plus weeks. But I'm excited for the next chapter and what we're going to do going forward. And I'm, especially proud to have done something difficult. And some of us will be up for re-election in 2020. And while some of the decisions that were made here were difficult, I am not one to take a look at short-term political expediency and in favor of long-term planning. So that's how I chose to view this budget, and that's what I'll be doing going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Lachiondo. And next, we have the assessor, Bob McQuaid.
Madam Chairman, thank you. This is not the easiest seat to be in because everyone has said everything that I think is worth saying, but there's one thing that I do want to just talk about briefly. But before I do that, I want to thank the people in my office who worked on the budget. The clerk's office, I know they just put so much work into it, and it's so wonderful. When we have questions, we can go over and get information from your office, and it's information we can count on. And then, of course, the Board of County Commissioners for the way that they ran the budget hearing process. I want to take just a moment and talk about the foregone balance that has had a lot of press lately, and my comments, if I could just make them. The foregone balance that was used are for one-time projects, and these are critical projects. And these weren't really projects that the commissioners prioritized. The Transformation Board, we looked through all of the projects over $100,000 and we ranked them in order of urgency and how critical they were. And we were the ones that prioritized those, and these were the ones that were high on our priority. I was so glad to see the commissioners fund those projects. I know it was very painful for everybody. I just have a comment about the foregone balance. I know Ada County has been criticized in the past for having a large foregone balance, but other agencies that are able to have foregone balance, they have almost zero balance. And to me, that says that they were spending the money as quickly as it came in. Ada County let the taxpayers have that money, which they could have done what they wanted with it. They could have invested it, used it to purchase something, but they have had that for all of these years. And now the county is taking some of that back and it's using it for, I think, projects that are extremely critical and they're just one-time expenses. I just want to wind up by echoing the prosecutor Jan Bennett's comments that this board is just, this group of elected officials is just an amazing group. We really are. It's a collaborative group, and I really appreciate that. And really welcome the new commissioners. They really have continued fostering that environment of collaboration. Madam Chairman, that's everything I have, and it's getting late.
Thank you so much, appreciate that. Thank you again. I want to thank all the elected officials, the department heads, and the public for engaging in this process with us. And we really appreciate Clerk Phil McGrain and his presentation and his team's efforts on behalf of all of us here tonight, looking at our Ada County fiscal year 2020 tentative budget. And with that, I'll close the public hearing and we will adjourn. Thank you so much.